Nat's True Crime Podcast, and I'm going to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer, a Serial Killer, Episode 1. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the first of two sons to Lionel Herbert Dahmer, a Marquette University chemistry student and later a research chemist, and Joyce Annette Dahmer, née Flint, a teletype machine instructor. Lionel is of German and Welsh ancestry, and Joyce was of Norwegian and Irish ancestry. Jeffrey Dahmer sexual assault, murder, and dismembered 17 boys and young men between 1978 and 1991. Dahmer is also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. During his later murders, he engaged in necrophilia, cannibalism, and preserving body parts. He was killed in 1994 after fallen inmate Christopher Scarver beat him to death. Jeffrey Dahmer's victims: 1978 to 1989. Stephen Mark Hicks was Jeffrey Dahmer's first victim and took place on June 18, 1978. Stephen was hitchhiking and Dahmer invited him to his house to drink alcohol. When Stephen wanted to leave, he was bludgeoned with a dumbbell multiple times before being strangled to death. He dismembered the body before burying him in the back garden. Weeks later, he returned to the corpse to remove the flesh and dissolve it with acid. He crushed the bones and scattered them in the woods. Stephen Toomey murder took place on November 20th, 1978 at the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee. Dahmer claimed that he has no memory of committing his murder. He took the authorities that he woke up to find Stephen dead. He woke with bruised fists and a bruised arm and concluded that he had beat him to death. Dahmer bought a large suitcase to remove the body and took it home to dispose of. He once again disposed of the body, but retained his head to use for sexual purposes. The murder of James Doxtator took place on 16th January 1988. He was a 14-year-old male prostitute who Dahmer lured to his house to pose for nude pictures in return for $50. The pair had sex, and afterwards Dahmer drugged and strangled him before disposing of the body in the trash. He retained his head for months after the murder. Richard Garrell was murdered on 24th March 1998. Dahmer met him outside a gay bar and offered him $50 to spend the night with him. He was drugged and strangled, and a sex act was performed on his corpse. He disposed of the body in the trash and retained his head for a month after the murder. On October 23rd, 1988, Dahmer led another man in the house after drugging the victim. His grandmother disturbed him before he was able to murder the man. She knew that he was not alone, and so Dahmer took him to the County General Hospital. On October 26, 1988, Dahmer was arrested for drugging and molesting a 13-year-old boy. Dahmer was convicted of second-degree sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes. In January 1989, he was sentenced to 1 year in prison and 5 years of probation in May 1989. Dahmer was allowed out on work release, required to register as a sex offender, and was released after 10 months. Jeffrey Dahmer murdered his fifth victim, Anthony Sears, on March 25th, 1989, and between being convicted of and before sentenced for sexual assault. He met him in a nightclub and found him exceptionally attractive. He drugged and strangled him before disposing of most of his body. Dahmer, however, kept his head and private parts preserved in a jar for many years. 1990, Raymond Smith's murder took place in May 1990. He was a male prostitute led to Dahmer's flat for sex in return for money. Raymond was drugged and strangled before he was dismembered, and his skull was kept and painted. Dahmer took photographs of his victims in various poses. A week later, Dahmer attempted to kill another, but after led a young man to his apartment, he accidentally drugged himself. Dahmer awoke to find that he had been robbed. The murder of Edwin Smith took place in June 1990. He drugged and strangled him and put his body in the freezer with the hopes that it would dry out and not decompose. He had intended to retain the skull, but it exploded after he put it in the oven. Ernest Miller was murdered in August 1990 after going to Dahmer's apartment in exchange for $50 after being refused oral sex unless more money was handed over. Dahmer attempted to drug him. However, he did not have enough sedatives and instead sliced an artery in his neck. He took photographs, kept some parts that he later intended to eat, and also his skull that he later painted. Jeffrey Dahmer murdered his ninth victim, David Thomas, on September 24th, 1990. He persuaded him to return to his flat for drinks and to pose for photographs in exchange for money. He sedated him and killed him, but as he felt no attraction towards him, he did not keep any body parts. 1991, February to May. Carter Strada. His murder took place in February 1991. Dahmer led him to his apartment by offering him money to pose for photographs and for sex. He drugged, handcuffed, and strangled him and kept some of his body parts. Dahmer also photographed the dismemberment. The murder of Errol Lindsay took place on April 7th, 1991, he was drugged and a hole was drilled into his skull and acid was poured in. Dahmer had hoped to create a submissive zombie, but after Arrow awoke, he knew his experiment had failed, and he drugged and strangled him to death. As with earlier murders, he kept his skull. Anthony Hughes was murdered in May 1991 after being led to Dahmer's apartment to propose for photographs. He was strangled to death and his body was left for a number of days before being disposed. Dahmer kept his skull. Jeffrey Dahmer's 13th victim was killerEpisode phone, who he offered money to exchange for allowing him to take photographs. He was drugged and sexually assaulted before Dahmer drilled into his skull and poured in acid. Vasil's phone passed out and Dahmer left to go to a local bar. Dahmer returned to find Rex sitting naked on a street corner with 3 young women. Dahmer tried to take him back inside, but the women had phoned the police. The police arrived, and Dahmer was able to convince them that they were lovers and killerEpisode had drank too much. The following a quarrel. The police concluded it was a domestic despite tests from the women. Dahmer was able to prove that we lovers with photographs he had taken. After the police left, Dahmer injected acid into killerEpisode's brain, and this injection proved fatal. He kept his victim's skull. June to December. Matt Turner was Jeffrey's 14th victim on June 30th, 1991. Turner was led to Dahmer's apartment on the promise of a photo shoot. He was drugged before being strangled and dismembered. His head and other organs were kept in Dahmer's freezer, and he kept his torso in a plastic drum. The murder of Jeremiah Weinberger on July 5th, 1991 was the result of another failed experiment to create a submissive zombie. This time, he injected boiling water into his brain and it led to his death. He was dismembered and his torso was kept in a plastic drum. Oliver Lacey's murder took place on July 15, 1991, after being led to Dahmer's apartment to have photographs taken. He was drugged, strangled, and dismembered. His head and heart were kept in the freezer, and his skull was kept. Joseph Brehart was Dahmer's last victim, and he was murdered on July 19th, 1991. He was strangled and left on Dahmer's bed for 2 days. Later, he was dismembered and his torso was placed in a tub of acid. Arrest and confession. Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested on July 22nd, 1991 after a failed attempt to murder Tracy Edwards. He had invited him to his apartment to take nude photos for money. Dahmer attempted to handcuff him and threatened him with a knife. Edwards managed to stay calm and found the attempt to escape by punching him in the face and running out of the front door. Edwards found 2 local police officers, explained when he had been, and asked them to remove the handcuffs. They were unable to that would return to order to get the key. One officer found a large knife in the bedroom and opened drawer revealed the Jeffrey Dahmer Polaroids that he had taken on his victims. The officers quickly realized that the photographs shown to be the Pole's bodies matched the decor of Dahmer's apartment and were in fact real. Dahmer initially resisted arrest, and an officer opened the freezer to reveal a human head. Further searches revealed 4 severed heads, 7 skulls and skeletons, and more body parts in the fridge and freezer. Dahmer waived his right to legal representation and confession to all 17 of the murders. He blamed his urges to kill on a desire to be with someone, whether they were dead or alive. He kept skulls and bones in order to build an altar. Trial and punishment. Dahmer was charged with 15 murders, charged for all victims except Stephen Army. In his case, the district attorney did not believe that murder could be proof beyond a reasonable doubt, as he had no memory of the murders. His trial began on January 30th, 1992, and counsel sought to establish his mental status. Despite much debate and diagnosis, many made he was declared sane on February 15, 1992. He was found guilty on all counts of sentenced to life to 15 life sentences. The death penalty had been abolished in the state in the 19th century. In May 1992, another life sentence was added in a Ohio court. How did Jeffrey Dahmer die? In July 1994, the first murder attempt was made on his life when a fellow inmate attempted to slash at his throat. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer's death came at the hands of inmate Christopher Scarver in the prison gym showers. He had been severely beaten with a metal bar, and Jeffrey Dahmer died an hour later in the hospital. Scarver also murdered Jesse Anderson, who had accompanied the pair to the gym in the same manner. Scarver told prison guards that God had made him do it. He later claimed that prison guards known he wanted to murder Dahmer and had let him do it by leaving them alone. Family life. Jeffrey Dahmer's parents were Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Flint. He was raised in Ohio by his parents, who thought when Dahmer was younger that he was a shy boy. After his crimes were revealed, Dahmer's father and stepmother Jeffrey Dahmer would regularly visit him. Lionel wrote a father's story, and the book was about his son and the reasons he may have became a serial killer and about their relationship. Joyce Flint was upset by her son's crimes and attempted to commit suicide. Dahmer's brother David changed his name in order to disassociate himself with the crimes of his brother. Media. Personal. My favorite Jeffrey Dahmer document is Confessions of a Serial Killer. Jeffrey Dahmer featured in exclusive interviews with Dahmer featuring his father Lionel and his stepmother Mary. Another documentary called The Jeffrey Dahmer Files ad was released in 2012 featuring archive footage and fictional interviews with those who known Jeffrey Dahmer. The Jeffrey Dahmer movie, My Friend Dahmer ad, was released in 2017 and is based on the graphic novel ad of Director who had been friends with Jeffrey Dahmer in high school. Raising Jeffrey Dahmer is a movie focused on the relationship with his father during the early years and during his murder trial. Thanks for watching my podcast. Please like, subscribe, and comment.